Hiya, Squirt.
Has this ever happened to you?
You're going on 3.5 hours of throwing your big dumb head against a wall trying to beat this insufferably difficult boss fight, and yet somehow only getting worse as the time keeps slipping through your sweaty, inept fingers. Then, on attempt number 487, you somehow manage to finally conquer this formidable foe, only for it to do this to you. And that's when you're like, all right, you know what? Fuck this game, and fuck every video game for that matter. Stupid ass hobby anyway. I knew I should have taken up knitting instead. I hate my life. So you decide to take a break for a couple of days, hit up an old friend to grab coffee, go see a movie, maybe take a walk through the neighborhood. Then one night on the subway ride home, you decide, why not? I've got nothing else to do. And you manage to just fucking obliterate the damn thing on your first try. These moments can be incredibly cathartic, but they can also bring into question why we choose to introduce further adversity and stress into our already difficult lives. Now, I've had a pretty good lot in life, all things considered, but I'm no pushover, all right, tough guy? I'm into fucking union, pal. In fact, you know what? Give me a beat and watch me lay down some heat just to prove it to you. Okay. My name's Nintenmedy. I'm here to say that if you fuck with me, I'll put my foot in your ass. Did that rhyme? I feel like it... Okay, well, you get what I'm saying. Just because my voice sounds like the fucking talking flower from Mario doesn't mean I haven't seen some shit. Case in point, the year I was 22. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like that might have been the shittiest year of my goddamn life. But hey, I like to keep these silly little videos of mine relatively light. So for this anecdote, I'll be referring to myself in the third person as Bi-Curious George and using my mascot as a stand-in. Aw, so cute, right? So Bi-Curious George had just gotten out of the psych ward. This was a 2-week involuntary admission after being stuck in a hospital bed the week prior, and Bi-Curious George quickly discovered that after 3 weeks of not showing up to work, they were now unemployed. This meant that Bi-Curious George had no definitive plan of how to start paying off their hospital bills and how to keep paying rent for the kitchen they were sleeping in. And to make matters worse, even though Bi-Curious George didn't have health insurance, the kitchen they were sleeping in did have a gas leak in it. But it wasn't all bad. Luckily, Bi-Curious George was released from the psych ward just in time for their 23rd birthday, baby. Which was actually a couple days before their grandma died. Listen, I'm not sharing this story with you for pity points, which I guess YouTube is actually calling hype points these days.
Hype, 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 hype.
But rather to give you the context of where I was in life when I first played one of my favorite video games of all time. Now, for most gamer ladies, God of War Ragnarok is not considered to be particularly difficult. But what you have to understand is, I'm not like other gamer ladies. Not to brag, but I was pretty malnourished as a baby. So if you hand me a controller, chances are I'll instinctively just start sucking on it. All that to say, my first playthrough of Ragnarok lasted 2 whole months in which I struggled to fight off Valkyries, Berserkers, Heimdall, and bankruptcy. Now, if I had it my way, I would have just torn through this entire game in one sitting because I was fucking obsessed with it. The story, the presentation, the score, it all just clicked in this inexplicably perfect way. But just when I felt like I was making good progress, the game would say, all right, you know what? You've been playing for 4 hours straight and what little muscle you have is starting to atrophy. So here's a couple of pissed off alligators for you. Maybe it's time to go outside now, okay? What do you say, buddy? It felt like getting those pop-ups in Wii Sports, except this time in the form of skill checks. And at the time, these difficulty spikes felt like they were booting me out of my own enjoyment. I wanted nothing more than to just completely dissociate from the fact that I was broke, had just moved across the country from my family, and probably had carbon monoxide poisoning. Yet somehow, this game's difficulty outweighed the adversity I was facing in my own shitty life. Now, what I didn't realize at the time was that the real challenge wasn't defeating Needhog or committing animal abuse. The real challenge was applying for Medicaid, calling my mom, and getting some fucking exercise. The real challenge was learning to appreciate life again. By the time this video releases, Silksong will have been out for over a month. And despite chipping away at this game consistently since day one, at the time of writing this, I am still a sizable chunk away from finishing Act 2. In fact, I am currently stuck right where you probably expected me to be. And yeah, it sucks. Bilewater has a well-earned reputation of being the worst area in the game. A reputation that I was already aware of and dreading before I even got there myself. And yet, nothing could have truly prepared me for just how suffocating and oppressive this god-awful place is. Silksong is a hard game, but its brutal challenge is typically juxtaposed by the beauty that emanates throughout every frame of its hand-drawn presentation. There's such an astonishing degree of vibrance and variation in the environmental design here that it somehow makes its predecessor's art direction look redundant in comparison. So even though you're dying to the cogwork dancers dozens upon dozens of times, the allure of the fight's aesthetic feeds into that addictive gameplay loop, gently coaxing you into one more attempt at success, one more attempt to learn the enemy's telegraphs and attack patterns, and one more attempt to finally hear the end of Christopher Larkin's masterful accompanying track. On the other hand, Bilewater just makes you want to give up entirely and start going back to church. This location is utterly repulsive in every sense. From the Mountain Dew diarrhea color scheme, to the maggot-infested waters and pissant enemies, to just the name itself. The only beauty to be found in Bilewater is the soundtrack that accompanies it. And honestly, I think it's a terrible fit. It would have been much more appropriate if Christopher Larkin just farted and shitted into a microphone and had that playing throughout this dog-ass area. But like I said, Silksong is just a difficult game in general, so the ugly aesthetic alone wouldn't have justified Bilewater's meteoric rise to infamy. Nah, what really cemented this area's deplorable reputation is the long and tedious boss runback, including but not limited to a bunch of airborne shitheads strategically placed to block your path, difficult to navigate hazards that completely ruin your healing ability, oh, and an unskippable enemy gauntlet that you have to repeatedly encounter every single time you die. And at the very end of this shit snack of a runback sits this giant turd of a boss fight with Grohl the Great, whose epithet really should be changed to Grohl the Ragebait. In light of this narrative that Silksong is too difficult for people to enjoy, Team Cherry has released a few post-launch updates that have actually made certain sections of the game a little more forgiving. This has predictably led to a lot of certified badass gamers taking to the internet to claim that Bilewater is actually not that hard, guys. You just suck at video games. In fact, according to me and all my other friends with a Souls-like superiority complex, Silksong should have been more difficult, but you just had to force the developers to nerf the game entirely, so thanks a lot, asshole. God, I hate it when the things I love are made so other people can enjoy them. And look, I've already established that I generally suck at video games, so I'm obviously biased against this kind of rhetoric because I'm often the target of it. But beyond that, I find this attitude of get good or go fuck yourself to not only be worn out, but also contributing to this vocal minority of gamers just being some of the absolute worst people you'll ever encounter online.
You know, it really brought me back to that feeling of playing Hollow Knight for the first time, where, you know, I just had this feeling that it was just ripping off Dark Souls.
However, I understand that games like Hollow Knight are designed for you to learn from your mistakes and improve over time. And if you try to make a game that appeals to everyone, then you are likely making a game that appeals to no one. Do I wish there was an easy mode so I could recommend Silksong to my friends who are, no offense, even shittier at video games than I am? Yes. Do I think Silksong is too hard in my personal experience? No, not at all. Don't get me wrong, it's pushed me to my absolute limits, and at times teetered on the edge of feeling unfair, but all in all, I think Silksong's difficulty has played a crucial role in its longevity, and likewise, its longevity has played a crucial role in overcoming its difficulty. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship, and I think it's the antidote to this toxic trend of downplaying people's complaints about difficulty as just a skill issue. Who knew that the secret to getting better at a game was just to spend more time with it? But that's really just part of the equation, because the process of relentlessly grinding is one of diminishing returns. For me, the more crucial part to overcoming a challenge is simply taking a break. And right now, that's exactly what I'm doing with Bilewater. The vast majority of content nowadays is made to be consumed and immediately disposed of, typically falling into one of two camps. Short, bombastic clips that seek to hook the viewer within the first 2 to 3 seconds of clicking, or overly drawn-out second screen content that constantly repeats itself so you don't have to lend it your full attention while you do something else. Neither one of these formats leaves much of a lasting impact on their audience, because neither one of these formats challenges their audience. They are passive and easy, meant to be swiped through or mindlessly consumed as background noise. And while video games uniquely demand your undivided attention in comparison to other artistic mediums, they unfortunately have not been spared the fate of expendability. Just look at the live service model. Games that try to retain your attention for as long as possible by shelling out chunks of disposable content in perpetuity with the intention that you'll stay engaged with the current update for just long enough to buy the next one. We have limited time on this earth, and even more limited time to engage with this constant flow of perpetual content. But it's not the time I've dedicated to playing Silksong that has limited the other content I've been able to consume, but rather the time I've dedicated to not playing it. My love for this game has grown even more in my time away from it, apart from the idiom that absence makes the heart grow fonder, because these breaks allow for reflection, adaptation, and digestion. And speaking of digestion, some of y'all must be straight up playing this shit on the toilet. There are people who waited 7 years for this thing to come out who are 100%ing it in like a week. And while I admire the skill it takes to do something like that, I also have to wonder, like, are you okay? Because unless you're a speedrunner or you're rushing to get a review up, I can't imagine this is allowing for you to fully appreciate Silksong, or more importantly, fully appreciate 8 hours of sleep, or taking a shower. Even GameSpot didn't post their full review until nearly a month after the game's release, and the reviewer said she didn't even finish Act 3.
Nothing in Silksong feels unfair. So far, at least. I haven't yet completed all of Act 3.
Which kind of begs the question if you could even consider this a full review. On the other hand, when I see how only a little over half of players make it to Act 2, I have to wonder if it's because the game is actually too hard for them, or if they felt like it was just gonna suck up too much of their time. Now, in my case, the amount of time I've spent with the game is in no small part due to my lack of skill. But I'm grateful for that time nonetheless. It's the first time since God of War Ragnarok that I've allowed myself to take a real break between attempts while still fully committing to my goal of finishing the game in my own time. And that longevity, that prolonged exposure to the game's challenges, and by extension, the game's mechanics, story, art direction, and score, that's what builds a long-lasting relationship. A game that will go on to help define a section of your life. And as someone who typically strays away from challenge, as someone who knows their own shortcomings and who is predisposed to consume easily digestible content in great volumes, Silksong's difficulty forced me to slow down and fully appreciate it. We are living through dark and unprecedented times on a global scale. Even those of us fortunate enough to not be unlawfully detained or actively experiencing a genocide still have personal, everyday struggles to deal with. And maybe that's exactly why we choose to play video games that add further stress and adversity to our already difficult lives. Because part of getting older is realizing that there are some challenges in life you won't be able to overcome. Some challenges are truly out of your control. Some challenges you will fail to live up to without a second chance. However, it is in fact always possible to beat a challenging video game, even when it doesn't feel like it. It just might take your undivided time and patience. It just might take something as simple as putting the game down and coming back to it later. But don't discount those breaks. Don't overlook the space between you and your next attempt. Because when you're aimlessly strolling through a park in the middle of your favorite city, or when you're creating something that you're genuinely proud of, or when you're looking at the most beautiful person you've ever seen and they look back at you and smile, in those moments, you are unstoppable.